Hi, everybody. How about we stand up just for a second, because I was just with you about 5 seconds ago, and I couldn't stand it even 5 minutes more. And I'm going to talk while we're standing, because this is a long time without a break. But we have a lot to cover. Nancy Bechtol with the Smithsonian Institution, and we're going to talk a little bit about our greening program, and we're very excited about our greening program. We're going to open up just with a little bit about what is the Smithsonian Institution. Everyone really knows about our mall facilities that ring our National Mall. What you don't know about is all of the science centers that we have throughout the world, and also just all of our collection storage facilities, as well as our 19 museums. But today, what I'm going to mainly highlight is our newest museum, our 19th museum, and that is our National Museum of African American History and Culture, which is about 2 weeks away from opening. As a matter of fact, our opening day is going to be on September 24th. We have been busy building this absolutely beautiful new museum, thanks to our federal taxpayer, in part. 50% of the entire project has been paid for with federal tax dollars, and 50% of this entire project has been paid for through private donations. So it's been a partnership with many, many people building this gorgeous building. We've been working on it for 13 years. 13 years ago, a bill was passed, and we began looking for locations. We began seeking architects and construction firms, and so this is what we've ended up with. Everyone in this room has been watching this thing coming out of ground. It's been actively being built for the past 4 years, actually under construction, about 4.5 by the time we open. The design is done by Freelon, Ajay, Bond, and the Smith Group, and our construction project was all completed by Clark, Smoot, and Russell. So it's been a conglomerate of a lot of people to work with. Oh yeah, sit down anytime you're ready to sit down. I just wanted you to get your blood running. So we are going for LEED Gold for this beautiful museum, and in doing so, we have been designing this museum from the very beginning to be our most sustainable museum yet. We have thought in terms of daylighting. We have thought in terms of solar, put it on our roof. We have thought in terms of trying to reduce the amount of daylight loading inside, the heat loading inside of the building. That's the reason why we designed this gorgeous corona that's over along all of the outside edges. We've also designed an entire landscape. It's a 5-acre site. And that landscape is literally a rooftop garden. So the museum is 60% underground. Only 50% of the museum do you see above ground. So we have rooftop gardens. We have gorgeous irrigation throughout the entire property, with a full weather station on the property to run that irrigation system, only as needed. Collecting gray water. This gray water will feed that irrigation system, as well as all of the toilets. So basically toilets and urinals. And then also we have lots of daylighting within that space. Over 75% of the light during the day will come from actual daylight. And that was a challenge to actually do that. We're also fully LED lighting within the actual exhibits, 36 exhibits. So when this museum does open, it's going to be hard to get into. Be patient with us. We'll try to get as many tickets through there in its first year, but it will take several visits to see everything that this museum has to offer. State-of-the-art restaurants and state-of-the-art, literally, exhibition as well, which I mentioned. There's a full-fledged recycling program within this museum, but actually Eric Hollinger's here to talk about the whole Smithsonian wides, and we're just a part of it with that museum. So I'm going to turn it over to Eric.
Thank you, Nancy. And one of the things that's at the National Museum of African American History and Culture is that they're going to be composting with a pulper in that museum as well, which is great. So I'm an archaeologist at the Natural History Museum, so I'm the archaeologist that studies the Smithsonian's trash. Everybody knows archaeologists study trash. It's usually thousands of years old, but 20 minutes, what's the difference? The same principles apply. It's all about human behavior. The Smithsonian has been recycling for 154 years, that we can tell. This letter from our archives shows that the Smithsonian, the first director, first secretary of the Smithsonian, ordered the placement of baskets in offices for the collection of scrap paper to be sold in the markets. Not too much is different. We still collect it, and we still sell it today, but our baskets have become a little more sophisticated. You see here, this is for paper and bottles and cans, something that the secretary couldn't have imagined that we'd have plastic bottles and some of this type of technology. And you see that we separate our material here. We don't use single stream. We don't pay for people to take away our material. They pay us because we keep this material relatively pure at its source. We still collect a lot of paper and a lot of cardboard, and we study not just how it's collected, the behavior behind that, and how to improve on that, but we study the facilities where it goes to try to make sure that it actually does get recycled, and we know what happens to it. The bottles and cans, for instance, recyclers will tell you, give them 1 through 7 plastics. Give us everything, we'll sort it out. You pay them to take it away. You're paying them to take it away and then separate materials that they incinerate for energy. They do not recycle everything. Accepting it and recycling it are 2 different things. You put a hot dog in here, they'll accept it. They won't recycle it, and it could be a problem for them. It adds to their costs. So we study what happens on their end to try to make efficiency improvements on our end that we hope will be more sustainable and more cost-effective for everybody, for the bigger picture. When we started recycling bottles and cans, and this really was, for us, just about 10 years ago that we began looking into this, and we faced some interesting human behavioral issues there. We had some resistance from some of our administrators because they said, oh, we tried this once and it didn't work. There are problems because the public can't be trusted to pour out their sugary liquids, and so it attracts bees, and people get stung, and oh, it was a catastrophe. Administrators here, we tried that once and it didn't work. People got stung, it was a catastrophe, and they stand down. We tried that once and it didn't work. It's powerful language for administrators. At the Smithsonian, there's a lot of scientists there. We study everything, and we pick things apart. So we ask, does that really make any sense? You see in these containers here, the public can't be trusted to pour out their sugar liquids, whether it goes in a bin labeled recycling or it goes in a bin labeled trash. They're going to throw it away anyway. Are the bees more attracted to it because it's labeled recycling or because it's blue? No. Our entomologists tell us that's not the case. So we started with, that was one of the last barriers to fall, and we started recycling bottles and cans, and we continued to refine our containers and our design. And lately now we use these blue containers with flap lids that help keep bees out, and keep squirrels out, and keep other animals from moving things away. Keeps the water out too. Keeps it cleaner and makes it easier on our guys to pull the bags. So our recycling rates for bottles and cans are growing astronomically. We're not the typical federal agency that has mostly office paper. We have so many outside visitors, we may be more like the Park Service that gets a lot of people coming that are consuming beverages. And this is the natural history alone. We are now do 40 to 50 tons a year of just bottles and cans. Because we sell it, we offset $129 that it would have taken us per ton to throw it away. And we can make, if it's cardboard, it's more valuable. If it's bottles and cans, less valuable. We may make or offset up to $200 per ton by taking this approach. So a lot of people are talking about cost effectiveness. This is about best practices as well as sustainability. We study where it goes. Again, the recycling facility, this is where most of our recycling goes. This cup I have in my hand is made out of corn. It looks like a plastic bottle. If this makes it into that recycling, it will be like throwing a hot dog in there. It will contaminate that resin. They cannot recycle it. It will damage it. So the manufacturers try to make things look like materials that we're all comfortable with, but it looks just like a number 1 plastic. It looks just like something we would want to recycle. When it goes to these facilities, if it's not shaped like a narrow neck bottle, they grab it off that conveyor belt and put it in a bin behind them, and it gets incinerated for energy. They do not turn it upside down and look for that little number there. This is number 7, PLA, polylactic acid. It's a corn-based resin. So we study what happens to it at the other end to try to make how we gather it and how we educate our staff and public a little bit better, so ultimately, hopefully, it can help what they do at home, make it more efficient at home. We recycle pallets. Everybody is starting to recycle this, and we get paid for our pallets. We are recycling electronics more and more. In the last year alone, our electronics recycling has increased 3-fold. Scrap metal, we get paid for our scrap metal. We have, at the Smithsonian, we have a lot of unusual waste streams. There are a lot of weird things that end up in our trash, beyond our bottles and cans and our paper and our cardboard, everything from whale fat and blubber and things like that, to, in this case, our DNA labs, where we process DNA and analyze DNA. They generate a lot of number 5 plastics that comes in little trays, little blue and yellow trays and red, that are an odd shape. They have a number 5 on them, but again, you can't see that. With that shape, if it goes to our recycler, it will get incinerated for energy. Our lab guys are real concerned about this, so they collect it themselves. When they get a truckload, they take it to a Whole Foods warehouse. Whole Foods sends it to the preserve company, and they make it into plates, toothbrush handles, and things like that, where it's only number 5 plastics, like yogurt cups. Acrylic from our exhibits and from our gift shops, we recycle, we get money for it again. This is a load of 3,000 pounds just in that one load. And recently we've been starting to recycle our bulky debris, our large open top dumpsters that have wood, carpeting, cinder blocks. We send these now to a facility in this area, a facility called Recycle One, and they pick it apart and they can recycle the carpeting, cinder blocks, and the wood. You send one of these dumpsters there, if it's got the usual contents, 85% or more of that dumpster can be recycled. We also do a lot of interesting, innovative forms of recycling, including our Banners to Bags initiative. These are the banners on the museum. Historically, they would have been thrown in the trash. But now we try to reclaim them, and we send them away. We wash them, and we send them away.
On the van of white.
To be, and I'll hold one up too, so I think because the camera might be on me. This is a butterfly banner. These are made into tote bags, and we offer these for sale. And from the proceeds, we buy LED light bulbs. And those light bulbs save up to $66 per bag in energy costs over the life of the bag. There's no cost to the federal government, but it is benefits to the federal government. Oh, we try to do it at the holiday time, so they're popular as gifts. Earlier, Beth mentioned our garden out front in natural history and integrating that in education. This is a scene of that garden. We have large fossils in our gift shops. Every now and then, a 5-year-old will knock one of them over and break it. We can't sell that again, but we can use it in our garden and add that as an educational display and keep it out of the way in our dumpster. So we try to get creative. One of our biggest challenges is manure, because the National Zoo is part of the Smithsonian. So 600 tons or more a year of manure is, right now we send it to a composting facility and we have to pay for them to take it. So any of you with USDA or other federal agencies that have a need for some free elephant manure, very pure, we know what they're eating. We're looking for a home to help make this more cost effective for us, but it is a huge amount of compost that we generate. Our other big area of compost is from our restaurants. As we mentioned, Namaka is going to be composting. Right now, we compost at 3 of our other major restaurants. The Natural History Museum alone, 200 tons a year. This is where it goes. Again, we research and monitor where everything goes as much as possible. Prince George's County is where it currently goes, and they have almost real-time feedback with us. When they get a load they think is from us, they'll send us pictures. And we'll look at that, and from a picture, we can tell whether it comes from our museum or not, and we can tell whether there's a contamination issue that we need to address with our restaurant staff. The Folklife Festival, it may be one of the areas where we are most publicly visible and where our sustainability accomplishments are most easily seen for a period. And this also will transfer to Lisa's discussion of the National Mall, because this is out on the mall. It's out on the lawn. The Folklife, the Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage, does not have a building, so they're most known for this festival, which every year, this will be the 50th anniversary next year, and 400,000 to 1 million people come to this for 10 days. It's the biggest, longest, most sustained event on the National Mall that I'm aware of. And it's not your typical music festival for 2 or 3 days. Great, you can divert a lot of your waste from that. We do it 10 days straight and through the 4th of July, including the 4th of July. If you've been to the Folklife Festival 10 years ago, you would have seen us add 300 or so trash cans out there, and they'd be overflowing with styrofoam. And they'd be blowing around, and our guys would be running around changing those bags, trying to keep up with it. In 2012, we tried to launch composting, and we started with a pilot just for our staff picnic, and we figured out this could be done if we made those 300 cans go away and created stations where people had no choice but to come to us. We continued to refine the approach. In the next year, 74% of that waste was diverted. The next 2 years, 93% each year of the waste was diverted, and last year, 96%. This is close to zero waste. Because the public. Thanks. A lot of this is about the applied anthropology, studying what happens, what are people throwing away, how are they doing it. We strategize about where do we place these stations, what do we call them, what do we name them, how do we train our staff to interact with people. And we constantly watch and study the behavior every year to try to see how we can take advantage of that. And our contracts for our vendors, we try to make sure they use compostable products. Yeah. So everything coming from our vendors, we can say, it's all compostable, drop it. We're not even going to touch it. No sorting involved, drop it. It's from one of our vendors. We know it's all compostable. Unless you hit a diaper in there, then that's all right, we compost it. So how are we doing with this approach so far? Right now, we're still a little bit below 40 or below 50%. This year, we're probably going to be in the upper 50s. Maybe we'll pass 50% by the end of the fiscal year. But with these approaches, some of these are fresh that we're just launching with the dumpster diversion and some of our composting operations. We fully expect that we'll pass 50%, and we should get in the 70s and 80% by the time we reach kind of a plateau.
Right.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
So I'm one of the nerds that gets to speak today. Kathleen asked me to share the story of what I think of as the tragedy of the commons of the National Mall. And she said, well, you know, you can talk about your book. So shameless plug, the National Mall, no ordinary public space, just came out hot off the presses in August. Just a show of hands, how many people have ever been to the National Mall? Yeah, okay, I know I'm speaking to an audience that knows this place very well. So I don't have to tell you what a special, important place this is. Most of us refer to this as the nation's front yard, right? It's where we inaugurate our presidents. It's where we protest to enhance and expand democracy and citizenship. It is where we gather to celebrate the 4th of July. It is a public space that is unparalleled in the United States. It is truly not an ordinary public space. And yet, the work I've been doing over the last few years has really showed this place to have some real challenges when it comes to a more sustainable future. And I asked Kathleen, you know, do you want me to be optimistic or do you want me to tell the truth? You know, I'm a scholar, I can fudge the things a little bit. And she said, no, I want you to be optimistic, but I also want you to tell the truth. So, you know, what I've learned over the last few years of researching the National Mall as a public space, as a highly visitable and very symbolic landscape, is the struggles it has in achieving a sustainable future. So I have 3 obstacles I want to share with you today, because I think these 3 obstacles get at the heart of some of the reasons why a more creative, sustainable future is a challenge for us to envision for the National Mall. And I apologize in advance if anybody here is from the Park Service or some of the other federal agencies. I'm about to challenge with some of my ideas. Okay, so 3 obstacles. The first is something that is part of a wider context in American cities, and that is we have been disinvesting from our public realm in many ways for many decades. We're not building roads and bridges. We're not maintaining them. We're not maintaining our public spaces. And the National Mall is one example of how we have really retrenched from investment in the public realm. Let me give you a few examples. The mall looks pretty good the first time you see it. If you look a little carefully, you'll see some really alarming sights. You'll see crumbling sidewalks. You'll see benches that are broken. You'll see light fixtures that don't work. You'll see algae in Constitution Gardens, which, of course, if you've been following the Washington Post, you know last week 200 fish just bellied up and died in the algae-soaked Constitution Gardens, right? The mall is a mess when you look really carefully. And if you want to find a good cup of coffee, forget about it, right? We have not invested in this space in terms of not just the amenities that we would expect to see in such a vital, important public landscape. We don't even invest in the maintenance and routine, daily maintenance and operations that needs to happen. And part of the problem is that Congress hasn't been doing right by the National Park Service. When I started writing my book in 2008, the mall suffered a $350 million backlog in maintenance and repairs. Today, it's $820 million. The Park Service, which is celebrating its centennial this year, actually estimates it has an $11 billion backlog amongst all the national parks. Our public spaces have been the victims of Congress that won't appropriate the right amount of money. We're not doing right by the mall. And this means that maintenance and basic operations go really undone throughout our public spaces, but they're really noticeable on the National Mall, right? So you probably will start to notice those more next time you go down there. The second obstacle, I think, that comes from disinvestment, but also comes from a very convoluted management structure. The National Mall is technically a federally owned public space. It's part of the National Park System, but the National Mall is more than just the park system. It's actually many stewardships that have jurisdiction over the mall. So you might be surprised to learn, well, the Smithsonian certainly does, and they're doing a much better job in some ways than some of the other federal agencies. Architect of the Capitol, National Gallery, USDA, DC government, all of these agencies have some sort of stewardship or jurisdiction over places on the mall. And yet they don't talk to each other. They don't know what each other's doing. They don't like to coordinate or do comprehensive planning together. And so one result, for example, is fragmented websites. You can go to the Smithsonian website to find out what's going on at the Sculpture Garden, but it's not going to tell you when the ranger tours are of the Lincoln Memorial. And so this kind of fragmented government dysfunction has also led to a lack of creative and innovative visioning around planning this space as a unified, comprehensive urban space. And then lastly, a lack of public participation. This is public space. And by definition, public space is supposed to involve public participation both in planning and development and imagining a better future. And yet, unfortunately, the way that we do planning is very ad hoc, piecemeal on the National Mall. And so while the Smithsonian has done an amazing job planning their buildings and getting them to LEED certified quality, the Park Service and other parts of the mall kind of go without a lack of a good sustainable vision. Let me give you an example. In 1970, Earth Day was first celebrated on the National Mall. In 2010, there were no recycle bins on the mall. 40 years from the first Earth Day, and the National Mall, our public front yard, which we should hold up as the standard bearer for all public space, didn't have recycling bins. So Coca-Cola steps up and spends $1 million to buy the Park Service 300 recycle bins. So that's the good news. The bad news is that we're now relying on the private sector to essentially pay for what Congress isn't, right? And so, my work on the National Mall has said, so I'm going to try and end up optimistically here, and that is that my book doesn't have the answers to any of these challenges, but I hope what we can take away from today, at least, is this notion that we do have to start a conversation around protecting and reinvesting in our public realm, whether it's our water systems and our infrastructure, or whether it's our public spaces. We can do better. So let's start talking about that.
Okay, I don't know if we have any time for questions. It's time's up. So we're around. Ask us questions when you see us. Thank you.
Thank you.